Good morning. Welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading Deuteronomy chapter 16. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Lord thy God of the flock and the herd in the place which the Lord shall choose to place his name there. Thou shalt eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction. For thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt in haste, that thou mayest remember the day when thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of thy life. And there shall be no leavened bread seen with thee in all thy coast 7 days, neither shall there anything of the flesh which thou sacrificest the first day at even remain all night until the morning. Thou mayest not sacrifice the Passover within any of thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee. But at the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place his name in, there thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. And thou shalt roast and eat it in the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt turn in the morning, and go unto thy tents. 6 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord thy God. Thou shalt do no work therein. 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn. And thou shalt keep the feast of weeks unto the Lord thy God with a tribute of free will offering of thine hand, which thou shalt give unto the Lord thy God, according as the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. And thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God, thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant and the Levite that is within the gates, thy gates, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow that are among you, in the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to place his name there. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and thou shalt observe and do these statutes. Thou shalt observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. After that thou hast gathered in thy corn and thy wine, and thou shalt rejoice in thy feast, thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless and the widow that are within thy gates. 7 days shalt thou keep a solemn feast unto the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase, and all the works of thine hands, therefore thou shalt surely rejoice. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee. Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee throughout thy tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. Thou shalt not wrest judgment, thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift, for a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise, and pervert the words of the righteous. That which is altogether just shalt thou follow, that thou mayest live, and inherit the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not plant thee a grove of any trees near unto the altar of the Lord thy God, which thou shalt make thee. Neither shalt thou set thee up any image which the Lord thy God hateth. Summarizing Deuteronomy chapter 16, Moses is continuing his farewell address to Israel. He's preparing them to build their own society in Canaan. And so, this current population that Moses is talking to, this is the second generation out of Egypt. So, the first generation are the people who left Egypt with him. They observed the plagues that happened with Pharaoh. They crossed the Red Sea with Moses. So now we're at 40 years later. God tells Moses he's going to die in Numbers chapter 27 because of what he did in Numbers chapter 20. He was supposed to speak to a rock to get water for Israel, but instead he hid it. And for that disobedience, God told Moses, well, you're not going to go into the land of Canaan either. You're going to die. And Your brother's going to die because of your disobedience. So Moses, before he dies, he's trying to take all that he knows and really ingrain it in this second generation. He's already anointed Joshua to be his replacement. Even though Joshua is a sincere young man with the right spirit, he's unseasoned and he may face some difficulties trying to fill the tall order of leadership that Moses is going to leave behind. Verse 1, observe the month of Abib. Celebrate the Passover to commemorate God leading Israel out of Egypt. Make your sacrifice at the worship location that will be revealed later. Verses 3 through 4. This is covering a dietary restriction Israel is to adhere to while observing the Passover. The first restriction, eat only unleavened bread for 7 days. The second restriction, do not keep any meat sacrificed the first day until the next morning. And then verse 3, we have the bread of affliction. So what this is saying is the bread of affliction, it's called that just because it was the manner in which the bread was prepared. So to honor that, because they had to leave so quickly, to honor that, they're going to eat the way that the bread was hastily prepared. Verses 5 through 6. Only make the Passover sacrifice at the place that God will reveal at the evening. This is during the season that Israel left Egypt. Verse 7, it says, go into thy tents. So because this is a 7-day event, this could be just the temporary shelter that they should have while they are engaging, or while they are participating, that's the better word, while they are participating in this ceremony, they have their tents. And that would make sense because if this is their permanent dwelling place, it would not make sense for them to have tents that they live in. They would build something more permanent. Verse 8, 6 days eat the unleavened bread. Day 7, this is a solemn or serious assembly. It's a serious gathering. Do not work on day 7. Then we have verses 9 through 12, which is the Feast of Weeks. This is outlining this tradition, the Feast of Weeks. Count 7 weeks from the time that grain is cut during the harvest time, and then make a free will offering. Celebrate with your children, the servants, the Levites, the widows, and the fatherless at the place that God will reveal. While you are participating in this Feast of Weeks, remember, Israel was a slave class in Egypt. So when we have the strangers there, the Levites, the widows, the fatherless, remember, don't be stingy with these people because you were once slaves. Verses 13 through 15. This is the Feast of Tabernacles. This feast should be held 7 days after the grain and wine have been gathered. Israel should include in this celebration their children, their servants, the Levites, strangers, the fatherless, and the widows. This celebration should be completed at the location that God will reveal, this worship location. This is also a solemn or a serious occasion. You will be blessed for honoring this tradition. Verse 16. 3 times a year, your males must appear before the Lord at the place that God will reveal, this worship location. And the 3 times these males must appear. 1, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 2, the Feast of Weeks. And 3, the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 17 says that at every one of these appointments, or in each of these events where the men must appear, they must give as he is able. So this is an action word, or this is an action that is outlined and commanded. And this is about giving to this worship location that's going to be established later. As we see, there is no specific percentage given. It doesn't really have a name like tithe or offering or anything. It just says that the man is supposed to give as he's able. It doesn't even specify if it's supposed to be money, labor. It just says give as he's able. Verses 18 through 20. This is a new topic after these ordinances. So now we're talking about rulership. Appoint judges and rulers among you from your tribes that will judge fairly. These judges, these rulers, they shall not, one, make judgments concerning a person's status. So a judgment should not be influenced by the status that a person holds. Two, the judges or these rulers, they shall not accept bribes or gifts. In the King James Version, it says gifts, but in the margin, it'll say bribe. That's another good thing about reading from a hard copy, because there's a lot of notes in the margins, and sometimes online the notes aren't the same. So with these judges and rulers, their status should not affect the judgment, and they also, whoever is judging, should not be accepting bribes when trying to provide a solution or judgment. Follow justice and inherit the land that God gave you. Verses 21 through 22. Do not plant a grove. And when we see the word Asherah. Every time the word grove has been mentioned with this, it's been referring to this Canaanite goddess, Asherah. Do not plant an Asherah pole near the altar that you build for God, and do not set up any image which the Lord thy God hateth. So for this Asherah pole, I did mention in Exodus 34 that this is the website that the world may know. This is a well-rounded theologist that wrote this article, and it was very helpful because we haven't got to that point in the Bible yet. But this alludes to the I don't want to say it's a fact just yet because I didn't read it for myself. But this is saying that the children of Israel actually end up falling into idol worship in the future. So Moses sacrificed his entire life. He lost his brother's nephews. He's not able to go into the land of Canaan. He could have lived as an Egyptian, but he decided not to, just for Israel to fall into idol worship anyway. And the reason why this was important for the Asherah pole is because this was Asherah. What this article says is that Asherah was worshipped alongside other Canaanite gods, and the God of the Bible, Yahweh or Jehovah, was worshipped alongside these other gods. And throughout history, Asherah somehow got linked with Yahweh instead of Baal. Yahweh, Jehovah, and Baal, they have some similarities. And because they were worshipped together, now there's a historian that made the assumption that Asherah was Yahweh's wife, when actually this was just confusion because of the disobedience from Israel. So before that even happened, God told them, hey, don't even put this don't put that next to me, so that we don't have that confusion in the future. But according to this article, which I have not read in the Bible yet, but it's just very, very interesting putting this information together. So the other thing that I wanted to just mention, don't plant a grove. There's also a few other things. So this says don't set up a pillar, but there's several words here: pillar, stone, image. When we go to the interlinear, which is the Hebrew is the closest translation that we have to the original format of the Bible. Okay, I forgot which chapter I was on. I just wanted to show this really quick because I thought this was very interesting and it had my brain tickled just a bit. So, okay, when we get to the interlinear, this is the closest thing to the original. It says sacred pillar. But when we look at all these other translations, we have pillar, sacred stone, memorial stone. I looked up what the term memorial stone meant, and this is a tombstone. So this got me to wondering, like, because we do have reverence for tombstones, just got me wondering, is that one thing? We have already gone over what image meant: a visual representation, a likeness, picture, an idea or a concept, popular conception. When I saw this, it made me think of the American dream. Because you got to be asleep to believe it. Huh. I also typed in the term sacred pillar. And the reason why I typed in sacred pillar and memorial stone is because when I typed it into the dictionary, it didn't bring up anything. Let's see. So that's why I typed it in here, just to see what this meant. But when I typed in sacred pillar, it did the same thing with Merriam-Webster. But we see these types of statues that are supposed to be revered. So this is what I have for Deuteronomy chapter 16. And the next upload will be Deuteronomy chapter 17. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. I love you. I know you love me too. Me and you are going to have a wonderful day.